Hey everyone. So when you think about air combat, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Probably a fighter jet, right? A classic dogfight. Well, I'm here to tell you that picture is, well, it's dangerously out of date. The whole game has changed, and the threats coming from the sky are nothing like they used to be.
You see, yesterday's threat was, let's say, a lot more straightforward. You were on the lookout for a single type of attacker, a bomber, maybe a fighter. You kind of knew what you were looking for. Today, it's a whole different beast. We're not talking about one thing anymore. We're talking about a coordinated, multi-domain attack that's hitting you from the air, through the electromagnetic spectrum, and even in cyberspace, all at the same time.
And that brings us to the big idea for today, the hybrid aerial threat. So what is it? Put simply, it's when an attacker throws everything at you at once. Drones, missiles, jets, and mixes them with invisible attacks like cyber warfare and electronic jamming. But here's the absolute key. It's all synchronized for a single mission. It's not just the variety of weapons. It's the fact they're all working together. It's the coordination that makes it so deadly.
So, to really wrap our heads around how dangerous this is, we first need to understand the individual instruments in this orchestra of destruction. Let's open up the attacker's toolkit and see what's inside.
First up, you've got the classics, manned aircraft. You know, your fighter jets, your bombers. These are the heavy hitters. They're the ones carrying massive payloads, delivering precision-guided bombs right on target. They bring the brute force.
But then you've got a much more modern piece of the puzzle, UAVs, or as we all know them, drones. And these are a total game changer. They can be your eyes in the sky, they can be armed strikers, or even just one-way kamikaze weapons. What makes them so scary? Well, they're cheap, they're incredibly hard for radar to spot, and you can use a ton of them at once, a swarm attack, to just completely overwhelm a target's defenses.
Next in the toolkit, the missile threat. And we're talking about the whole spectrum here, from low-flying cruise missiles that hug the ground to avoid radar, all the way up to unbelievably fast ballistic and hypersonic missiles. What do they all have in common? Blistering speed, incredible range, and just raw destructive power. All of which makes them insanely difficult to intercept.
Okay, so not all threats are things you can see or touch. Electronic warfare, or EW, is basically an attack on the senses of a defense system. Its whole purpose is to blast radar with noise, scramble communications so defenders can't talk to each other, and block GPS signals. In short, its job is to make the defenders completely deaf and blind.
And finally, there's the truly invisible assault, cyber attacks. Just like EW, this isn't a physical weapon, but man, it can be just as devastating. An attacker could hack into an air defense network and just shut it down. Or even worse, they can manipulate the data, feeding the system false targets, creating total chaos and making an effective response pretty much impossible.
So we've seen all the individual instruments, but the real terror of a hybrid threat is how they're all conducted together. You have to think of it less like a random battle and more like a really complex heist movie, where every single piece has a perfectly timed role to play. Let's walk through what a typical attack might look like. It could kick off with a silent cyber attack that messes with the command network. Then the electronic warfare starts, jamming radars and creating a fog of war. Under that cover, they send in waves of cheap drones, some for spying, sure, but most of them are just decoys, designed to make defenders waste their expensive missiles. And then, with the defenses confused, blinded, and distracted, that's when the real killers arrive, high-speed missiles aimed at critical targets. And only then, once the path is totally clear, do the manned aircraft come in for the final blow. You see how each layer just makes the next one even more effective? And all of this creates an absolute nightmare for the people on defense. Their radar screens are just flooded with targets. Some are real, but a lot of them are fake. Their command centers are overloaded with conflicting information, and the time they have to make a life-or-death decision, it shrinks from minutes down to mere seconds. In all that chaos, telling a harmless decoy drone from a lethal cruise missile becomes nearly impossible. It just makes it painfully obvious that our traditional ways of defending the skies, they just aren't enough anymore.
So that sounds pretty bleak, right? How in the world do you fight back against a threat that's coming from everywhere all at once? Well, you can't just build a bigger wall. You have to build a smarter one. And that brings us to the modern defense strategy, the layered defense shield.
At the very heart of any modern defense is something called an integrated air defense system, or IADS. And the key word there is integrated. An IADS is all about connecting all of a country's eyes and ears, all its radars and sensors, with all of its weapons, all its missiles and guns, into one big coordinated network. If the attack is a symphony of chaos, the IADS is the conductor, making sure the response is unified.
And the core philosophy of an IADS is layered defense. The logic here is actually pretty simple. No single weapon system can stop every type of threat. The missile you'd use to stop a hypersonic weapon is not the right tool for a slow-moving drone. So the goal is to build these concentric rings of security, where each layer is tailor-made to handle different threats at different distances.
The outermost ring, Layer 1, is your long-range defense. This is the very first line of protection. It's designed to spot and take out the biggest, most dangerous threats, like ballistic missiles, while they are still hundreds and hundreds of kilometers away. If anything gets through that, it runs into Layer 2, the medium-range defense. This is really the workhorse of the entire system. It's built to handle threats like those terrain-hugging cruise missiles and enemy jets that manage to slip past that outer screen. And then, finally, you have the last line of defense, short-range and point defense. These systems are all about protecting specific high-value locations. Think a command center or a critical airbase. They act as the final backstop against anything that has somehow made it all the way through, like those low-flying drones.
But the story doesn't end there. It never does. Warfare is this constant evolving cat-and-mouse game. As our defenses get more and more sophisticated, so do the attacks. And the next generation of threats, believe it or not, is already on the horizon.
Just think about what's coming. We're talking about AI-enabled drones that can actually make their own combat decisions without a human in the loop. We're talking about fully autonomous swarm attacks that coordinate among themselves, more advanced hypersonic weapons, and even using space-based systems to support attacks happening here on Earth. This technological race is just getting faster.
And this really brings us to a final and pretty critical question we have to ask ourselves. As these hybrid attacks become faster, smarter, and eventually fully autonomous, does that mean our defenses have to become autonomous too just to keep up? The answer to that question is going to define the future of security for all of us.